Hey guys, welcome to this episode of the podcast. I get to sit down with Joel Turner from Shot IQ, and I can't tell you how excited I am about this episode, not only because Joel shares a very similar philosophy as me when it comes to a shot process, but he's dove so much farther into it and has really developed a foolproof system and has just taken that to the next level. And for having somebody like him onto the show that I can learn from and find out some of my mental flaws and be able to work on things, I'm really excited to improve and maybe even learn alongside the audience on this episode, because Joel is an awesome resource to help get the most out of yourself before you expect that out of your gear. Let's fix our own shooting capabilities first. So great episode. Joel is an awesome resource for this, and couldn't be happier with the way this turned out. So, as always, guys, if you want to see more, you can become a Patreon of the show, have a much more in-depth view and feel of the show. You guide where the conversation goes. You can actually get your questions answered directly by the guests, and you really control how the conversation goes. I mean, there's not really a better way to be a part of the podcast, and it's any amount right now gets you in. And happy to have you there as a patron, and all that money goes back into growing the show so we can help more people and get the information to the folks that need it. So that is www.patreon.com/onpointpodcast. If you want to become a patron, be happy to have you. As well as that, if you guys want to leave a 5-star podcast, that's a free way to help the podcast, and you can do that on iTunes. 5 stars, leave a review so I know you left it, and if I do another giveaway on there, you'll be entered in it as well. So, alrighty guys, from Shot IQ, Joel Turner.
Well, everybody's dealing with target panic. I don't care who you are. Every human mind deals with shot anticipation in one way or another. And, you know, I started shooting a bow when I was 7, and I was not good. I mean, I couldn't understand why I couldn't hold on a spot. You know, I'm in high school and I'm winning some tournaments shooting bare bow only because I can't put a sight pin on a target, right? So I'm shooting with no sights. I started that way back when, and you know, aiming several feet over a target, right? And then just dumping my bow in there and releasing the string all at the same time. And it was not good. So I kind of had to figure some stuff out. And then I became, I was a pretty good shotgun guy, but there's science behind that. That's just a lot of visual proprioception and you know, hand-eye coordination, if you want to call it that. You know, shooting a shotgun was easy, and it was all moving targets and everything. And that's kind of where everything led me. I was a wildlife specialist with USDA Wildlife Services, and we did a lot of shotgunning. But when it came to precision rifle work, like, I mean, one of our contracts was to harvest coyotes that were causing damage, livestock. And I'd call in a coyote, and as soon as the crosshairs would get on that coyote, I'd be yarding the hell out of that trigger. And it was horrible. And it's exactly the same thing that happened in my bow hunting. I mean, I started bow hunting elk at 14 years old, and it took me 13 years to kill a bull elk with my bow. Only because I couldn't hold myself together at the moment of truth. I mean, I've missed so many bull elk, it's ridiculous. I don't even want to talk about it, you know? So, but I just got sick of missing and not knowing why I was missing. And that's, you know, then I became a law enforcement officer, and that's when things changed. That's when more determination came in, because your shot now had a lot more value to it, right?
Yeah.
And that's when I started to figure out shot control, and then I became a firearms instructor, and that's when it really things started to come together. And then, you know, I wrote some articles and stuff, and had other firearms instructors. They were just articles for within the industry, and had other firearms instructors look at it. And one of the first things they said was, why didn't I think of that? You know, because it's simple stuff, but once you learn how to direct concentration, we've been doing it incorrectly for a long time. So
Well, you and I talked before this thing a little bit, and it was like, man, I like every time I go to the range, maybe a couple people a year at the local range here, not at like a legit shoot. Well, even at a legit shoot, 9 out of 10 guys are just. It seems like the widespread target panic, and it's like you said. I started off my whole life, even with a gun, back when I rifle hunted, and I have horrible target panic with a gun.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of a shoot it. It's going to get away. Shoot it right now, kind of thing. And then that just snowballed into just one day. I'm like, man, I can't hit a deer on the move. Like, I just can't do it. And it just, I see it with archery. I shot with archery for 8 years until I finally ran into some guys that, told me, hey, you want a surprise release, man. You don't want to know, you're shooting good, but you're not doing it correctly. You could shoot better, and just getting around guys that are way better shots than me. It's like, okay. And so what are they doing differently? And all of them have the same thing in common. They all are defeating target panic, and they're shooting just a way better shot process.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious from your perspective, why is this such a widespread pandemic? And I'm, for guys that haven't figured it out yet, we are pretty much this whole episode's on target panic, is what I'm going to call it. I don't know what what you would call that, but I see it every day. 99.9% of people have it.
Right. It's not something that you have. It's something that you're born with.
Okay.
Not a disease, right? It's the way the human mind works when dealing with explosions. The human mind is not meant to shoot stuff. Right? I mean, there's no target panic with a spear, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because a spear doesn't create an explosion. There's no sudden release of energy, right?
Okay.
The same thing as throwing a baseball or a rock or anything like that. It doesn't cause anticipation. Now, if a pitcher was to throw a baseball with the knowledge that if they threw it perfectly, the baseball would explode 6 inches in front of their hand, then that is now like shooting, because now the arm movement of the pitcher becomes an anticipated movement because it's going to cause an explosion. Same thing as that slight movement in your finger on your index finger trigger. Right? That movement becomes an anticipated movement because it causes an explosion, a sudden release of energy. Right? So it's not something that we get. It's not a disease. It is the natural path of the human mind. Because when you first shot a bow, you picked up a bow, I guarantee you didn't punch the trigger the first time. Right?
I mean, I'm trying to think of it. I probably squeezed it away, but I mean, my trigger panic with a rifle probably poured right into a bow. It was that bad.
Sure.
I'm horrible.
One shot with your rifle to set the whole thing in motion. Right? So however old you were, I know that I was 5 years old when I started yanking the trigger on a rifle. Because my dad handed me a 30-30 at 5 years old. I know exactly where I was standing. I know exactly where I was. He told me to work the trigger slowly, and I did it one time until that thing roared. And then once it did, the second shot, I guarantee you, I closed my eyes, I yanked the trigger, because that's what's natural. Yep. There's a drill that I do in my online course that you'll see. I'm tapping on people's hands, and it only takes one hit, one impact, and they formulate motor programs against it. So then the second time I go to hit their hands, they actually come out to meet me. And all I'm having them do is aim, like they're holding on to a pistol and they're aiming, like their thumb is a front sight, right? And I have them put it on some distant target and I start tapping their hands. It only takes one hit. And then the next one, they're going to anticipate it. So I'll hit them 4 or 5 times and then I miss. And when you miss their hands, you get to see the dip, the pre-ignition movements, if you will. So all these things that we're dealing with are absolutely 100% natural, and that's what people have missed. That's the core problem in shooting. The reason that we're all dealing with this stuff is that your mind will not allow you to cause your body impact as a surprise.
That's really That's really fascinating because I wrote an article one time, and it was on target panic, and I put a lot of time into it, and I directly called target panic a mental disorder, and from what you're saying, it's not. It's just it's natural. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's not a disorder. It's just something that you're gonna have to that you're naturally born with, and that you have to overcome with intent.
And you have to overcome it. You have to, every time you shoot your bow or your rifle or whatever it is, if you're doing it with absolute control, you have to basically consciously defy human nature every single shot. So that's what you have to know how to do. How do you do this conscious defiance of human nature, right? How do you concentrate? What decisions do you have to make in your shot? These are all the things that lead to shot control, but they're not the true skills that are ever practiced. I mean, I was at a 3D shoot on the 1st of January watching, and there'd be people that would come through, hey, can I shoot through? Yeah, go ahead, man. And they'd step up in front of our group and they just yank their bow back, pin gets close, yard the trigger. Oh, I missed. Sorry about that. Okay, I'll go get my arrow, and then off they go, right? They are essentially practicing their own failure because they're allowing every shot to make them weaker instead of using every shot to make them stronger. Practicing the true skills, the mental skills that drive all those physical movements. So,
would you elaborate on that? So if a guy's wanting to start, like he knows he like a guy like me who I deal with it and I work on it every day. I think you and I were talking. Says something to the effect that that target panic is a not a war that you win. It's a battle that has to be fought like literally every day. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's ring true. I mean, I don't know what you would. I mean, it sounds like that would ring true with your philosophy that every shot matters, right? I mean, can you expand on that a little bit?
Folks don't put enough value in their shots. They go to the range with the intent to practice, and all they're doing is they're making their pre-ignition movements more and more efficient. If they move the trigger, be it an index finger, a hinge, a thumb button, tension activated release, if they're shooting a trad bow, they're moving to a clicker, whatever type of mechanoreceptive trigger they're using. If you're moving that at a rate that you cannot stop in the middle, if you're allowing it to be what's called an open loop motor program, then you are essentially practicing your recoil bracing movements. That's all you're practicing. Your subconscious loves it because it's more efficient. It's not efficient for you, Garrett, to draw back and aim, put your pin on the spot, then hook your finger around the trigger, and then move slow enough, increase that back tension slow enough that you could stop it anywhere within the movement. That's not efficient, right? That's why your mind doesn't like to do it. And you're causing more tension in your body, and you're going to make this explosion a surprise. It will never like that. It's totally against the core problem in shooting, which again is your mind will not allow you to cause your body impact as a surprise.
That totally makes sense. And so here's a question. Like you and I were talking, and then our conversation got cut off short, and I was like, left me on a cliffhanger.
I had to go deal with it. That was a 4-car collision with a drunk driver, and it was a nightmare.
I was like, no, what am I saying here? That's not accurate here. Right. So I gotta get this out because you left me on a cliffhanger here. Okay. So the conversation was I said something to the effect that I switched to a hinge and for me it made fun. They made shooting really fun again. Like I shoot 10 times more arrows with a hinge than I do with a trigger, caliper release, thumb release. It doesn't matter. The hinge makes it so easy for me to just have that shot process that I can achieve the shot process I like, that I want. It's a surprise. And then I said something to the effect that the caliper releases, the finger releases, they just really don't work for me. And then you were going to go somewhere with that. And I'm dying to know, where I went wrong with that statement, because I want to get better, and I don't care if you have to flay me open and show everybody what I'm doing wrong. I don't care.
So that is the mindset. It didn't work for me. That is the mindset that most people approach instruction from, right? It didn't work for me. What you have to remember is that nothing will ever work for you, right? No matter what instruction you take, what system you follow, what release you shoot, it's never going to work for you, right? You have to work for it, but the instruction you take has to teach you how to do the work. So what you did is you went from your index finger trigger that you were not able to control, right? You were hoping every shot. You had no idea when you drew your bow back. You didn't know whether you were going to be able to press through that trigger or not.
Right.
It was totally set in hope. You had no absolute plan on how you were going to control that shot, what decisions you were going to make, when you were going to make them, and scientifically how you were going to carry them out. You had no plan, right? So that's the mindset of somebody that's expecting something to work for them. So what you did is you then went to a hinge release. The hinge is so much easier because the movement is bigger. It's more easy to evaluate, right? Because whether you're using back tension on the hinge or whether you're rolling it, whether you're relaxing your index finger, whatever movement you're doing to activate that shot, it's bigger. It's much easier to evaluate, right? So you can feel the movement in it.
You can.
Right? So you can feel the movement no matter what hinge you're shooting. You can feel the movement. And once you start to feel that movement, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about the movement itself, right? It's much easier to disregard the aim with a hinge or a tension activator release than it is with a index finger trigger or a thumb button. So once you go down, the scale works this way. You've got index finger triggers that everybody starts with, and then they punch the crap out of those. So they go to a thumb button, right? Because the thumb is supposedly a dumber appendage, right? So then they start punching that one. They're hovering over that thing like a cobra ready to strike, and then they thumb punch that thing, right? Then somebody says you probably should shoot a hinge. They go to a hinge. And that's kind of a turning point for some people. Some people take the hinge and work it like it's supposed to be done, and they start making decisions in their shot. Their plan is much more clear with this release. But if you're somebody that's hoping a hinge is going to work for you, they start punching that one too, right? And then the only thing left is a tension activated release. So the tension activated release, like a Carter Evolution or a Stan Element or one of those that goes on your bow poundage, you set it to a specific bow pound holding weight, 3 or 4 pounds over your holding weight. But with that one, if you don't pull, it's not going to go off, right? It essentially makes decisions for you, right? So in the scale of decisions, the index finger trigger, very difficult to make those decisions, to stay in that movement. Thumb button, little easier. There's numerous ways you can activate a thumb button. Then you go to the hinge, and that's the turning point on whether you're going to go toward, sticking with your hope it works for me, or you're going to go, okay, I can run this. Or then you go to the tension activator release. And if you can't master a tension activator release, it's very simple. Set it to where it won't go off ever, right? Draw back and aim with the safety on, take the safety off, and pull until you have a body tremor. What you're going to find, and I do this with folks that have trouble making decisions, right? If they come to my clinic and I'll run them through the gamut of releases and they won't make a decision. They just won't get over it, right? So then I'll set the Stan Element so heavy that it's not going to go off, right? So they draw back and aim, got that part done. That's job number one, right? Then they let the safety off. That's basically the critical second, the here I go. So they take the safety off, and then they start pulling on that thing, and then what you'll see is this big jerk of the body, and I call it a body tremor. That's the exact moment when they used to yard through the hinge or the thumb button or punch the trigger on their release. So I get them through that. I get them over that little hump, and then I ask them a very specific question. What are you thinking about? and they'll say, man, I was just trying to make this release go off. And then all of a sudden I'm like, screw it. And that's exactly when the gremlin comes in. That's when the subconscious comes in and says, let's get this over with. But it gives you that big yank, but you've got it set so tight that it won't go off. They put the safety back in. They let it down. We discuss it. That body tremor is a goal of mine when I'm training somebody, because that's where the subconscious tried to take it away. But because they were moving closed loop, meaning slow enough that they could stop it anywhere within the trigger movement, they were able to overcome it. It's a huge progression for a shooter to hit that body tremor and then understand exactly what happened, right? Hell, sometimes even the arrow goes off and, if they collapse or whatever, sometimes the arrow goes off. But what they need to realize is that was a battle between the subconscious and the conscious. So if they know what they were thinking, if they know what they were saying, if they know they could have stopped it, which they did in that particular shot, and they know exactly what decisions they made to keep themselves in the process, now they've got a blueprint for their controlled shot. What I want people to do is I want them to use different releases, not to surprise them differently just because they're different. I want you to be able to pick up the worst piece of crap, slowest trigger, gritty sears, all kinds of stuff. And your job is to stay in that movement no matter what. Right? You use releases for concentration practice. You're using every shot for concentration practice. So when you say that release didn't work for you, well, none of them work for you, right? You got yourself to a point where you started to make decisions in your shot. If you take those same decisions and put them back into the index finger trigger, now you start to get control of all of your shots, including your rifle shot and your pistol shot, because you're making specific decisions. So I got lots of decisions that I make within a shot, but I'll let you go ahead before we get to that.
Yeah, when you say that, I've said this before, and it totally makes sense listening to you describe it now, because when I started using the Hinge, and then I'd go back to like the short and sweet or a trigger release or whatever, I would notice that it would spill over into like all those good habits, all that shot process. And then if I shot that enough, I'd start to basically rewind, and then I'd go back over to the Hinge and I'd start, building those good habits. I'd start immediately with good habits. I mean, it's how do you with these cheaper releases, and I know it's a decision, but it's such a hard decision when you have trigger creep. For me, I mean, man, I don't know if I could. I mean, I'm sure I could if I tried hard enough, but for a lot of folks out there, I don't know how they would be able to get past that trigger creep, because once I start feeling that trigger go off, boy, is it hard.
Right. That's why those releases are so perfect for concentration practice. You're not using them for shooting. You're using them for concentration practice solely, right? But this is not on blank bail. This is on actual aimed shots at distance.
Okay.
Right? So you said that when you go back to that index finger trigger, it's good for a little bit. There's some transfer, right? But you never blueprinted your controlled shot. You're not taking the blueprint with you. So you're trying to transfer physical skills. There's no transfer. And your subconscious, as soon as you go back onto the index finger trigger, it starts to learn again, right? There are 3 stages of learning in the human mind. Number 1 is the cognitive stage of learning, right? That's why when you go back to the Hinge, you're cognitive again, right? So you're thinking about every specific movement, and also you're talking yourself through those movements in the cognitive stage of learning. Then you go to the practice stage of learning, and that's where all the self-talk and all that stuff stops, and you become more and more and more efficient, right? Think about how you progressed in your bow shot. Your first few shots, very cognitive. And then what'd you do? You'd shoot all the time, every day, right? You're in the practice stage with the subconscious goal of becoming automatic, right? So in most movements, that's a good progression, like swinging a baseball bat, throwing a football. That's the progression that the human mind wants to follow. In shooting, it's absolutely detrimental to follow that. You have to stay in the cognitive stage of learning, and that's what's so difficult with, like, people will blank bail shoot. Oh, they're magicians on the blank bail, right? They control everything. Well, what are they thinking about on the blank bail? They're thinking about their shot activation movement, right? And they don't have a pin on a target screaming at them to let it go. It makes total sense to the subconscious that when the pin is on the target, you shoot the arrow, right? That makes total sense. That's why you have to consciously defy it every time. But then they take these blank bail skills, these physical blank bail skills that they've learned, and they try to apply those to an actual aimed shot. There's zero transfer. It might transfer for 1 or 2 shots, and then the subconscious starts learning again, puts you in the practice stage and then toward the automatic stage. So shooting is the only thing that I can think of that allows you to practice this level of concentration. You have to practice to stay in the cognitive stage of learning. And that's where the self-talk is so important. You got to know what you're saying. You got to know what you're thinking, but you also got to know what you're saying during that shot. And all this stuff, all the decisions and all the concentration, all these things, they only last for 1 shot. And then you got to do the exact same thing again and again and again until the only thing that becomes automatic is the decision to shoot that shot with control or not at all. It becomes basically a principle by which you live. Like, I don't care who I'm shooting in front of. I will never, ever again shoot an uncontrolled arrow. No matter what. I know how I'm going to shoot every arrow for the rest of my life. And that is very powerful information, because that one decision, the original decision that starts every shot, is I will shoot this shot perfectly, or I will shoot this shot with control, or not at all. Think about
that totally makes sense.
You make that decision at the beginning of every shot, and then it gives you options. Like, hey, you know what? Nobody's got a gun to my head making me shoot this shot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it just brings you into the present so that it starts that process-based thinking instead of results. Most people, when they shoot at critters, never make that decision. They're only thinking in the future. Oh, man, that's a 6x6. I'm going to be a hero, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're thinking that, you're definitely not thinking about your shot process.
That totally makes sense. I mean, that really does. There was a buddy of mine that went from compound to trad recently, and did that for a long time, and now he went back to compound, and he's lights out. I mean, just whatever he did, like what that process you're talking about, not having that pin, has totally spilled over in what you call blueprinted.
Right.
I feel like he got that by shooting trad for so long.
Well, I mean, I hope so. What aiming is, the science of aiming is very simple. It's called visual proprioception. It's how your mind reads feedback from what it's seeing, right? Like when you are driving down the road, you see a yellow line and a white line, and you're looking down the road. And when you get visual feedback that your vehicle is veering slightly to the left, you automatically move your arm and you move the steering wheel until you get the right visual feedback that your vehicle's back in the middle of the lane. You don't have to think about the movements, right? You have no control over the movements, no conscious control over them. It's the same thing when you're aiming. Draw back and aim. Do not move into the target slowly from a certain direction. Get your pin on the target, right? And then the only control you have over that pin is to watch it, right? And you don't have to watch the pin. You want to watch the spot you want to hit, because that gives the pin an anchor point to always come back to, right? That's how visual proprioception works.
I'm glad you went over that, because a lot of the questions I get asked is like, what do you focus on during the shot? And like, do you focus on the pin? I'm like, I absolutely do not focus on the pin. Like, it seems like most people are wanting to focus on that pin. And back when I call it like rhythm shooting,
Mm-hmm.
or flyby shooting,
Mm-hmm.
that's what I would do. I mean, I did that for, God, 8 or 9 years, and
Where you're locked off the target.
well, you're just floating, and then I've dealt with that when I just last year I was dealing with hanging low,
Mm-hmm.
and that was prior to me using a hinge. And then the thing that, and you can tell me if there's something wrong with this thought process. The thing that I love about using with the hinge is that it literally takes everything else from me. All I have to do is aim, and then it just becomes how steady can I hold the bow, because I know if I just hold it there, it's going to be really freaking close, if not a bullseye. And I just don't care, when that shot goes off. As long as I'm doing my job,
Mm-hmm.
I'm good to go. Is there anything wrong with that shot process?
What is your job in that process?
My job's just to hold the bow steady.
Okay. So
I mean, that's all the everything else is taken care of. I mean, my form needs to be good, alignment with the pin and the peep,
mm-hmm.
and controlling my breathing, and that's about all I do.
So how do you activate your release?
I'm slowly. That's something I've been working on. Because I'm not super experienced with the. I've been using it for less than a year,
Mm-hmm.
and so I say I'm not super experienced. I've been using it for less than a year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still figuring out whether I'm going to relax with my index finger while pulling through with my back, or if I'm going to try and roll it with my hand, or if I'm going to keep bringing my elbow around. I'm still trying to figure that out, what the best thing is for me there.
Okay.
I'd love to hear what you would suggest.
So here's the deal. Your job has to change because you're putting concentration into something you have no control over. You have no control over how steady your bow arm is.
Okay.
How steady your sight is. It's completely run through your subconscious, right? So put the pin on it and let it dance. You have no control other than to watch the picture. Whether you focus on the pin or on the target, it's just a picture, right? So if you know it's 30 yards, put your 30-yard pin on it and watch the picture. It's like watching a movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to move. You have no control over it. Your only job is concentration on nothing other than your shot activation movement, which are those movements that you just explained in the release, right? Because if you concentrate on the aim and you let the subconscious take the hinge from you, it will always go open loop and it will put pre-ignition movements in it. You'll get almost to where the sear breaks and then you'll give it a little pop, right? And that's where that's going to take you out of the 10 ring. So if you should be able to do all of those movements that you talked about, and then you find which one is most accurate. I believe the most accurate is a hand roll, only because you're not putting more back tension input into the shot. So you're putting your back tension on a maintenance program. So you draw back and aim, get it done, watch it to keep it. Here I go. And then you lock the back tension in, and then you start the roll. And you can really feel it in your hinge if you set your hinge fairly slow, right? So you set it. Do you shoot with a click in your hinge or not?
I shoot. There's a safety, and I used to hate it, but I absolutely love it now.
Okay. So when you take the safety off, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're shooting
right about the time my anchor is about when it goes off.
You're shooting a true ball sweet spot.
The HBC.
Okay. HBC doesn't have a safety.
It's got that click, that thing that lets you. There's no actual safety, but when you reach a certain point, it clicks like a.
Click. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. The clicker inside the.
Yeah.
Okay, so you draw back and aim, and then you can move smoothly to the click. The click is your decision point. Okay, that's when you have to decide to move slow enough that you could stop it anywhere within it. Okay. Mm-hmm. So when you draw back and aim, that's all good. That's just, those are jobs that you have to get done. Then move smoothly to the click. Now, once that thing clicks, that is the decision point. Okay. So that's when you put your concentration into whatever movement you're going to do to activate the release. You put that concentration there through the use of words. Okay. Concentration runs through speech. Words are nothing more than attentional cues. They cue your attention to the definition of the word. Anytime you read a word, your mind instantly goes to the definition of that word. Okay? So that's the true meaning of concentration. You create what I call an attention bridge between your mind and your muscles. The bridge is made of words. Okay? So if you're going to roll your hand, let's say, all right? So your shot sequence would be draw back and aim, get it done, watch it to keep it. Here I go, right? The here I go, I want to talk about that in just a second, but those are words that I use specifically for a very specific reason, okay? Here I go, and then you start the roll. And if you're going to use those words to create that attention bridge, remember that as soon as the word stops, the bridge breaks. So as soon as you stop saying your words, your conscious mind is going to go into something else, like, oh my God, that's a big buck. I hope I get it. It goes into the future, right? It goes into results. It's got to stay in the process. So maybe a word that you might use is roll if you're going to roll your hand, right? So you start into that. Here I go. Roll. And the words are creating that attention bridge, but they're also, your movement is going to be exactly guided by the rate of your speech. Okay, so the word itself is going to put the conscious mind into that particular muscle group. How you say it gives that muscle group a rate of movement. Okay.
So are you talking to yourself in your head, or you verbally?
In your head.
Okay.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter whether it's out loud or in your head. It's still dialogue, right?
Okay.
And it's cognitive, right? It keeps you in the cognitive stage of learning, so that when you break that shot perfectly, you know exactly what you were thinking about. You know exactly what you were saying, not only what you were saying, but at what rate you were saying it. You know that you could have stopped it. And if you could have stopped it anywhere within the movement, that means that you were truly concentrated on it. You were in a closed loop control system. And finally, you got to know what decisions you made to keep yourself in that shot process. So can we get to the decisions? You want me to talk about those?
Yeah, I'm actually glad you got into that, because recently, about a month ago, I made a decision. Anytime I have a slight piece of doubt pop into that shot, I immediately have to let myself down. I just let down. So I'm dying to hear this part of it too. So please go elaborate into the decision part of it.
Okay, so the decisions. There are 3 decisions that have to be made in every precision shot, be it with a rifle, be it with a bow, pistol, whatever, okay? The first one we've already talked about, the original decision. It starts, you make that decision as soon as you believe the shot is imminent. I mean, you know how it is. The critter's coming in, you're like, oh man, I hope I get a shot at this thing, and the old heart's pounding and all that stuff, and then all of a sudden it starts to get in range. You're like, oh yeah, I got pins for that, right? So it gets in range, and then all of a sudden it turns broadside, and your mind's like, oh my God, it's actually happening, right? I'm going to get this shot. That is when you make the original decision. I will shoot this shot with control or not at all. Okay? That does 2 things. It, like I said, it gives you those options, like nobody's got a gun to my head making me shoot this shot, and it starts you into process-based thinking. Okay? Now, you've made your original decision. You pick your bow up. You start to draw your bow back. Now, this is where you have to make the original decision will not carry you through the entire shot. You have to make more decisions to keep yourself in the present, especially in extreme stress shooting situations. So you've picked your bow up, you start to draw your bow back, and now is when I say the half draw moment. So as I'm drawing the bow back, I say something to myself. Right? I don't care what you say. When I did this, I said, I'm going to do this right. And it just keeps you in the present of the process. It keeps you out of those results. So as I'm drawing my bow back, I say, I'm going to do this right. That reminds me of all the things that are in job number 1, which is draw back and aim, get it done, watch it to keep it, right? So now you've got your aim complete and your pin is hovering on this critter. I can guarantee you that every shot you have ever shot as a rushed shot, you have fired it within 1 second of you believing the aim was complete. Can you deny that?
No,
I
not
mean,
at
it
all.
makes total intuitive sense to your mind that when the pin's on the spot, to shoot the shot, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you shoot within what I call the critical second, that 1 second in time after the aim is complete, you will go open loop, meaning you're going to move your trigger too fast for you to evaluate. And it's going to have, when you do an open loop movement, it will always have pre-ignition movements linked to it, right? So that's just science. That's how it works, right? So you got to get yourself through the critical second. So that's that 1 second in time after the aim is complete. That's when I say to myself, here I go. That gets me through the critical second and reminds me, oh yeah, I'm supposed to move this release slow enough that I can stop it anywhere within it. And that right there, that 1 second, has saved more critters than anything out there, right? Because that's where people fail. They always shoot it within the critical second. So
That makes total sense. And if you look at, do you watch the Born and Raised guys at all?
yeah, oh yeah.
Do you notice how many of them shot before they were ready? Like when they were, like I think it was last year, a lot of them shot when that bull was moving.
Yeah.
And they're like, I should have waited. And I think that's what you're hitting on there is like, you know, they didn't have that aiming process down is what you're talking about.
They didn't get themselves through the critical second. They shot their arrow within the critical second. And, you know, most people will do that. Some are successful, some are not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to shoot a controlled shot no matter what. Even if that critter walks out of my sight picture, it means more to me to stay in the shot process than it does to get the result. And that's going to sound crazy to some people. But if you want true shot control, that's what you need to do. You need to use these critters for concentration practice, right?
Right. I had one this year.
I don't know if I asked you, but have you ever jumped out of an airplane?
No.
Okay.
No.
So have you ever bungee jumped?
Nope. I'm afraid of heights.
You ever jumped off a cliff into water?
What do you define as a cliff?
Well, I don't know, like several feet off the water.
Yeah. I've jumped off of into the water before.
Okay, so if you are at the edge of the cliff, right? How in the world are you going to get yourself to jump?
Usually my wife will do it for me. She'll talk shit to me.
Yeah. And then what? So she talks crap to you, and then what?
And then I jump. I make the decision.
That's right. You got to make a decision. There's no soldier has ever stood at the edge of a plane and just found themselves automatically falling out of the plane, unless they were hooked up or somebody pushed them, whatever. But if it's a solo jump and you got to make a decision to go, and it's one of the first times you've ever jumped out of an airplane, I guarantee you they have to make a decision, right? The decision has words attached to it. Most of them are like, oh, shit, here I go, right? And then they jump, because what you're doing is you are causing your body potential impact. You have to decide to do that every single time. It's the same thing that has to happen when you shoot your bow, right? So instead of firing the arrow within the critical second, fill the critical second with a decision. The decision to cause your body potential impact, right? It keeps you in the present, and it knocks out autopilot for the third and final time in that one shot. You've made 3 decisions: the original decision, the half-draw moment, and most importantly, the critical second. When you make those decisions at those specific moments in your shot, man, I'm telling you what, it is amazing the control that you can have on critters. It's so powerful.
Yeah, there's a mule deer this year that I shot, and you know, when I shot him, you know, I got him and everything, and then I was pissed. You know, I shot one of the best bucks of my life, but my shot process, I was so pissed off at myself. Yeah. I'm like, I didn't, you know, like, I don't know, it just took away from it, because I'm so obsessed with it now that it's like, man, and I saw Dudley talk about it one time when he even posted a video on it where he shot this. I think it was a bear, and he's like, I didn't have a good shot process on that bear, and that's really all he wanted to talk about was his shot process.
Right.
And I totally get that, and I don't really know anybody else. I've shot with guys, and I'm like, God darn it, like, why are you pissed? I'm like, I don't know. I it's hard to describe it to other people because most people are like, they're like you said, they're outcome oriented instead of process oriented. And even though I made a really good shot on the target, the arrow getting there was crap.
Yeah, it doesn't. If I shoot a critter, I haven't shot an uncontrolled arrow since 2014 was the last one that I shot, and that will be my last one for my life. But it doesn't mean I shot a giant blacktail buck at 8 yards out of a tree stand, right in the heart, but I did not get through my process, and that's the one deer that was my turning point. Right, that's when I said. I shot that buck. He ran off with the arrow sticking out of his heart. And I'm like, okay, cool. I got that buck, but I didn't do it. I did not control myself, right? So I sat in that tree stand in the dark and in the rain until I figured it out. I had to go through my shots. I had to go through my successes and my failures and figure out what is the difference, right? I had one controlled shot in 2008. And I had another controlled shot in 2010. If you've listened to any of my podcasts, I'm sure you've heard me talk about them. The 2008 one was on a hog. The 2010 one was on a bull down in New Mexico. And from 2010 to 2014, I killed a lot of critters, but I didn't control any of those shots. I was getting through job number one, meaning I was getting my aim on the target, but I was not getting through my mechanoreceptive trigger on my stick bow, right? It just I wasn't doing it because when I finally sat there in that tree stand, I went, okay, what's the difference? Luckily, I had those two shots to fall back on because when you shoot an extremely controlled shot, you remember everything about it. You remember the tension that was in it. You remember the decisions that you made, what you said to yourself and when. So I had those two shots and they were identical in control. So I sat there in that tree stand like, okay, what is the difference on, I'd shot numerous bulls and bucks in that time frame between 2010 and 2014. I'm like, it's the decisions. I didn't make any decisions on any of those other shots, right? And once I had the knowledge and I broke it down into those three decisions, now I've got the end of my blueprint. I had everything up to that. But I didn't have the most important part, which was the decisions. What decisions did I make to keep myself in the process for this one shot? And when I finally figured it out, I made that original decision a principle in my life. I'm going to shoot this shot with control or not at all. Nobody's got a gun to my head making me shoot this shot. And so now, 2015 to present, I've killed a lot of critters, and every one of them has been absolutely controlled. It's so cool because I know how I'm going to shoot every arrow for the rest of my life. Now, if it's a moving critter, like if I'm shooting moving hogs or, whatever it is, you're not going to get through it. Like I'm not going to press through my grip sear on that critter because that's not the environment. That's not what's required for that, right? It's easy to, a lot of people with target panic or buck fever or whatever, they like to shoot moving critters because they can set their pin off the critter and they let the critter walk into the pin. And as soon as the pin is in the right spot, they punch the trigger and they're usually successful in that. Right. But that's only they couldn't actually aim at the critter. They actually used the critter as a shot trigger, right? As a shot timer, basically. Right. So they're successful in that regard. But if that critter's standing there at 20 yards, they can't get their pin anywhere close to it before they punch the trigger.
I'm glad you got into that because I've got buddies that are great shots with the rifle. My hunting partner in one is, I call him Cool Hand Luke, man. He don't miss. And but with a bow, he just doesn't practice as much. But long story short, what I'm trying to get at is I avoid, and just listening to you talk about it, I avoid situations where I have to rush through my shot process. So I used to like to shoot like timed challenges. You know, how accurate can you shoot 30 yards in 15 seconds and stuff. I quit doing that a while ago, and I quit doing, you know, some of these guys do pop-up challenges, pop-up targets. What's your feeling on that? Because I really do enjoy it, and I enjoy shooting moving targets. Really enjoy shooting moving targets. I got a few videos up, you know, slamming arrows at 50 yards on a moving target, you know, but my shot process wasn't there. So what's your take on that, and how do you get a controlled shot process on the moving target?
You don't. So because a moving target is a timed event, you have to know when your bow's going to go off.
Right.
On a moving target. So therefore, it's an open loop trigger activation, meaning it's fast. It's too fast for you to evaluate. But that's the environment for that particular shot. So that's another skill set. I always tell people, you're never going to forget how to punch the trigger, right? That's what's natural, okay? So if you have to practice shooting moving targets, you know, practice your leads if you're going to track or trap or whatever you're going to do, right? Those are skill sets, but it can't be the norm. It cannot be your go-to shot. But when I'm training my SWAT guys, I make them shoot fast and close, right? And they're just banging away as fast as they can go. And then they have to shoot 100 yards with their pistol. Right?
Holy crap.
So they're shooting pow, 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 pow. Oh, there's a 100-yarder. Now they got to switch. Now they've got to concentrate on their trigger. Now they got to make those decisions, because if they don't, they'll never hit it, right? They'll never hit the precision target. Most bow shooting is a precision environment. It's a stationary target. But, you know, if a bull elk is walking past you at 10 yards, I don't expect you to have to work that hinge perfectly. I expect you to stick that whole rack of pins on there and get through that release, right? Because you don't need a perfect shot activation movement at 10 yards on a bull elk, right? Now, if you're shooting, if it's a very small target, you know, that's another issue. But if you recognize it as a precision environment, your normal shot has got to work those decisions. It's got to work the concentration. You got to move your release slow enough that you could stop it anywhere within it. That's your normal shot, right?
Makes sense.
You got to be able
to
switch between open and closed loop control systems instantly.
I've got another question for you regarding hinges, and a lot of guys, and this is something that I've been really struggling with myself mentally, is shooting a hinge in the wind. A lot of guys, they won't use them for hunting because of that, and that's something that I've been scared of, because that's something I've heard. I've shot them in the wind. It's challenging. It is challenging, but walk me through your mindset on that and your approach of shooting a hinge in, or, you know, I'd like to hear where you're at with that.
So a hinge is perfect because it's a longer movement, right? It's perfect for stationary targets with no wind. Now, if you are trying to shoot in the wind, you have to be moving slow enough to when your concentration goes to your aim, meaning you get blown off the target, you stop your movement, right? So, but if you try to punch your hinge, because it's a longer movement, if you try to punch it, if you go open loop with a hinge, it's usually 10 times worse than with an index finger trigger, because the longer movement makes it so that you invite more pre-ignition movements in there, and it just doesn't work out.
You have more time to screw up the shot is basically what you're saying.
Well, your subconscious has more time to plug in more bracing movements. Your bracing movements will be bigger. That's why when you see people punch a hinge, it's usually god-awful. So, you know, if you're dealing with wind, just know that no matter which way your pin moves, its next movement is always back to the middle. If you see movement completely off the target, then you stop your shot activation movement. You stop your roll, right? The pin's going to instantly come back, and then you start into it again, right? So that's kind of how to work the hinge, and you got to read the wind a little bit. But, you know, people shoot hinges because they're in target panic and they think they need to. It may not be the most accurate release system out there, right? There may be a more accurate release system for you. Maybe you shoot a thumb button better, right? Maybe you shoot an index finger better. You should have the control to be able to shoot them all.
That leads me into a question that one of the patrons has asked, and he wanted me to ask you this if you are willing to answer his question for him. Let me get the comment here real quick. So one of them wants to know, this is a little too off topic. We'll get into that one later. But going into another solid episode, he says, going over releases and 3 advantages and disadvantages would be swell. Also drills that you can do in a basement or backyard when it's not 20 degrees out. Developing form would be great. So he wants to know what you can do at close range and what your opinion would be for selecting a release.
So what you can do at close range is make sure that you do not blank bail. You need to be aiming at something, right? And make it a pinhead. Make it something that you can see your pin movement on, because you're using the pin movement for concentration practice, right? You're not concentrating on the pin. The skill is to be able to concentrate on the shot activation movement, even when you see pin movement, okay? That's the skill. So if you got to shoot blank bail type ranges, stick a pin into the target so that you can see that pin dancing around it and just let it dance, right? I don't usually recommend too much of that. You can if it's, minus 20 outside or whatever. But also when it's minus 20 outside, go shoot a couple arrows when it's super cold, because then the cold is your distraction and you're using everything you can for concentration practice. Right?
That makes sense.
So
it doesn't sound like you're a fan at all of blank bailing. Would there be a situation where or a training for blank bailing?
Blank bailing is for form only, right? If you are working on a specific aspect and it doesn't take that many repetitions to make that aspect or put that aspect into your subconscious, right? So people, the purpose of blank bailing is to get the feel of a good shot. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I do it all the time in my garage.
So you get this feel, but people stop the training there. They stop it at, okay, I've got the feel, and then they try to take that little nugget of feeling and they try to plug that into an actual aimed shot, right? There's no transfer there. What you need to do if you're going to do blank bail and you shoot this perfect shot, you got to blueprint it. Ask yourself the 4 questions. What was I thinking? What was I saying? Could I have stopped it? And what decisions did I make? Take that blueprint and that feel. The blueprint is basically how you got the feel, and then take that and plug that into an actual aimed shot. And then you don't have to go back to the blank bail ever. What happens is people go back to the blank bail to return to the cognitive stage of learning, right? But we're practicing staying in that cognitive stage no matter what, because we know how to stay there through the use of concentration. Concentration comes from words, right? So
right.
That whole control process shooting science. Now that
makes total sense.
The other question was, how do you select a release? Once you understand closed loop control systems, meaning how to actually move slow enough that you can evaluate, then and only then can you figure out what release you need. Because when you figure that out, if you try some different index finger triggers, are you able to set the trigger hard enough to where you can really climb into it? Really wrap that finger around it and put good tension on it, and then start into your rotation, your back tension movement. You're not moving your finger anymore, right? You're now working that rotation, elbows going behind you, not further back, it's going behind you. So you're rotating, and you should not be able to feel any movement in that trigger. And then all of a sudden it breaks, right? By far the best index finger trigger that I've ever found is a Carter-like mic. Only because you can set the trigger harder than any other model on the market. So you can really crunch into that thing and really set a really deep hook with a lot of finger pressure. And when you do that, when you're able to set a hook like that, it's very calming to know that, yep, I can really wrap into this thing, and then I can start my rotational movement. So, and not feel any travel. So that's a really good one for that if you're working an index finger trigger.
That leads me into a comment that you asked me, because you went and kind of did your homework on me on the YouTube stuff, watching a lot of my videos. And for guys that want to see somebody that's struggled with their shot process, go to me, a year ago, 2 years ago, and you'll see certain videos where it's great and some where it's bad, and in between. It's just really kind of fun to go back and look at that. It makes me cringe sometimes.
Right.
But if you asked me a question, and it's like, have you always shot with the release that deep into your hand? And answer was no. Long story short, what was the reason for you asking that?
Well, because when you take that deep hook that I'm talking about, right? But then you punch your whole hand through the trigger.
Right.
Right.
I'm slowly making that fist, and that's just something I picked up from a guy a long time ago.
It's not slow. It's, when you really look at it, it's open loop.
Yeah, it is.
It's
absolutely
too fast for you to stop. Once you send that motor program, it's sent, right? So I like your hand position on that release, but it's not a true surprise break, because if it was a true surprise break, the release would fall out of your hand.
Right.
Okay.
And I've been working on that lately, because after seeing that one post with your kid, I'm like, I wonder if mine does that, because I never paid attention to it. And then so I'm like, nope, I'm still holding on to it.
And it depends. I mean, certain hooks will keep the trigger in there, but
well, when I execute a good shot with the short and sweet, it does fall down. And so just that little post right there is like, okay, there's something here I need to work on it. And so I was just curious about that. So go on. Sorry for interrupting you there. I was just really curious, and I wanted to get your perspective.
Like I said, I like your hand position. I like that deep hook on the trigger, but I want you to concentrate on the movement more. Right. Okay.
That makes total sense.
And you were shooting through chronographs and all that stuff, so you were essentially blank bailing. Right?
Yeah.
But even then, it's still a shot. Either you use it to make you stronger, or you allow it to make you weaker. Those are your two choices with every shot you shoot, right? So we talked about index finger triggers, how to gauge those. Also, thumb buttons, right? There's a lot of different thumb buttons out there. Depends on, a lot of people's hand shape is different. They like a longer neck on it or shorter neck. Find what works for you, but no matter what, it requires no thumb movement, right? Once you hook your thumb on that thing, you are basically, increasing your back tension or your rotation, which stretches your hand. When it stretches your hand, that moves the trigger into your thumb. You're not moving your thumb into the trigger moves into your thumb, okay?
Right.
And that's what makes that break. You can tell if it's a surprise break if your wrist breaks downward. If your wrist breaks downward, it's a surprise break. If it breaks upward, then it's not a surprise break. It went open loop on you.
Very rarely do I ever see anybody shoot a thumb release correctly, and this is coming from a guy that doesn't shoot one but knows what it looks like. And everybody's like, "Oh yeah, I got a great release on that." It's like, man, you were like a quarter inch off that thumb barrel, and they don't even know it.
Yeah, like a cobra ready to strike, man. So,
exactly. I joke around. People punch triggers harder than Mike Tyson, man. I mean, it is
George
insane.
Wiles talks about it. He talks about that downward break, and he's absolutely correct on that. So
that makes sense.
That's thumb buttons. Hinges, again, it's shape. And some people like the double sear, where you can set the travel to the click and the travel after the click. So, to each his own on that. And tension activator releases, I cringe every time I see a coach put a shooter on a tension activated release and leave them there, because you don't have to make decisions with that release. You're not doing anything for your mental practice, right? You're simply going through the motions, safety in, draw back, aim, safety off, and pull, right? But those releases are somewhat difficult to get they're definitely not the most accurate, but they are the easiest as far as making decisions goes. So, like I said, I cringe when I see an instructor put somebody on those and leave them on that, because they'll never get any better.
Well, I don't know if you hear the same thing, but it seems like everybody's like, man, back tension, back tension, back tension. That's the most accurate thing. And it's like, is making like and listening to talk, is it making the decision to have that shot process? Because that's what basically that's allowing you to do, is making it easier for the person, and it kind of almost covers the real root cause. I mean, it doesn't actually treat the cause. You're kind of masking it up, is kind of what it sounds like.
Well, people are, it's, if you look at the movements that are required for these releases through the scale of them, index finger, very little movement. That's why they're so difficult to evaluate, right? That's why that like mic is really good to really hook into and work, because you can feel the movement. It becomes that bigger movement. Then they go to that thumb button, right? It's a different movement, but it's a little bit more than the index finger, and then the hinge, then the tension activated release. So,
It makes sense. I mean, it just seems like, because and you alluded to it earlier. A lot of guys, from what I've seen, and having done it, I'd say more successfully than some others, switching releases and stuff. It's just more of a placebo effect, and then eventually that root cause just starts showing through. Like, maybe it lasts a week, maybe it lasts 10 shots, but if you don't treat it, eventually, if you don't fix that hiccup, it's going to come through in that next release, is what my experience has been.
It is the natural way of doing business. If you allow a shot to make you more efficient, you're just going to get more efficient at your recoil bracing movements, right? To the point where now it locks your pin off the target, and it times the whole thing, right? It jumps your pin to the target, and you punch the trigger all in one linked motor program. And that is perfect for your subconscious. It loves it, because it knows that putting your pin on the spot equals an explosion. That's why it won't let you get there, right? That's why it holds you off the target until it's ready. And when it's ready, it jumps up and you punch the trigger. And it's a nightmare. I mean, you see it in all these prominent shooters. And, getting back to your back tension thing, if back tension was the most accurate way of shooting, then all the pros would shoot with back tension. But none of them do. They all shoot hinges, and they all roll it in their hand, right? And even those that try to go to a thumb button, they end up hucking those things halfway down the field. I mean, we've seen it numerous times of professional archers with a thumb button chucking that thing, and the next day they're shooting a hinge, right? They're trying to mechanically fix a mental problem. So, in the fingers world, you can see that back tension is not the most accurate way of doing business, right? There's people that shoot fingers with their compounds that just absolutely destroy everybody else, and they're not shooting with back tension. They're shooting a mechanoreceptive trigger, but it doesn't require back tension. That's why I shoot my sear systems like a grip sear or a tab sear, because I don't have to pull extra. I don't have that big input into my shot, right? Yes, it's good to maintain back tension, but if you have to increase back tension, that's just another thing that you have to put into your shot, that you have to keep consistent, right? So, and Olympic archers, they have to use back tension, but the movement that they're actually using is a controlled, a balanced expansion, to where, everybody thinks that they pull their arrow through the clicker. That's not true. They're actually rotating their elbow behind them, which extends their bow arm about 2 millimeters. And that's the movement that puts it through the clicker. They actually push their bow through the clicker. But the pushing motion comes from the rear. So it's kind of this whole balanced expansion thing. But, back tension in itself is just a bigger movement. It's easier to evaluate. That's why people think that it cures target panic. But
that makes a lot of sense. And one of the guys that showed me how to shoot with the hand like that, he's like, you're relying in pulling through the shot. He's like, you're relying on more. You're not just relying on that. He's like, you're relying on more, and it's easy. Basically, he was scratching the surface with what you're saying there.
Right.
So I got another question from a guy named Ben Carlton, and this is kind of off topic, so I apologize here. You're welcome to bring me back after it, but He's like, I've heard one before. Oh, gosh darn my phone. Basically, he wants to know, he says he's going to buy your book here soon. Wants to know what the deal is with your kilts. He wears them fairly frequently. Is there some tactical advantage he gains with them, or just enjoying his heritage?
So, I've found out that I do have some Scottish in me. And I'll tell you what, after you have elk hunted in a kilt, you will not wear pants anymore.
You're kidding me.
It is fantastic, man. Talk about freedom of movement. Oh, it's buddy.
I'm not going to ask you if you're going commando, but
I do not go total commando because I'm in blackberries, But yeah, the kilts are pretty cool, man. I wear them all the time. I do firearms instructor schools in them, and it's all good stuff, man.
That's awesome. Is there anything else in your system that you need to go over that, from somebody starting off? And I'm just going to assume the person listening to this, because, if I was a betting man, I'd be winning 99.9% of the times that they're dealing with target panic.
Sure.
What would be the first step? And if they wanted to start using and utilizing your system, where would they go?
So shotiq.com is my website, and on there I've got an online course in controlled process shooting. I've also written a book in controlled process shooting. But what people, before they go spending money on things, if I only have 2 minutes to spend with somebody, I always tell them about the critical second. That is the most important 1 second in time that anybody can put into their shot, because that's the main fail point, right? They may do all these things right in their shot, but they don't separate the two jobs. Again, job number 1, draw back and aim, get it done, watch to keep it. Job number 2 is to put your concentration into the movement that gets you through your release, right? You put that concentration there through the use of words. So people really need to analyze their shot. Analyze your trigger movement. Can you stop it? If you can't stop it, if it's too fast, then you need to know how to concentrate. You need to know these decisions and how to make them. And, I explain a lot of stuff. I really go into detail in the online course about open and closed loop control systems, how they work, how to get in them, how to stay in them, and how to practice them. So it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I absolutely eat up everything that you've been talking about, man. You've gave me a lot of stuff I need to work on, and it sounds like I need to up the poundage on my release a little bit, so I can get a little bit better hook on it.
Just use everything you can for concentration practice, even the critters that you shoot at. It's nothing more than your concentration test, right?
Yeah, it's just everything that you say totally makes sense to me, and we're going to have you back on here again sometime, man, because, I've been eating this up, and I am a sucker for improving my shot process, and anytime I can learn from somebody that has dug into it like you have, it's a treat. It really is a treat.
Yeah, well, it came from a lifetime of failure, my man. So
well, I failed hard for 7 or 8 years before I finally started even digging into it, and that was enough for me. So I'm just glad I figured it out earlier rather than later.
Right.
And guys that I know that have been still, everybody deals with it, man. It's such a great market.
yeah, right.
So, well, is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap this thing up, Joel?
No, just use every shot. Like I said, either you use it to make you stronger or you allow it to make you weaker, man. Get some knowledge.
Perfect.
Get control of your shot. Might be a New Year's resolution for you or whatever, but quit wasting time, man. You don't know how much you got, so just you might as well shoot controlled arrows while you got them, man.
All right, brother. Well, hey, I really appreciate your time, and we'll be seeing you here soon, I'm sure.
All right, man. Take care.
All right, see ya. So, what do you guys think? That's this episode of the podcast. If this isn't a 5-star episode, I don't know what is. Leave a review on iTunes. Let me know what you thought. Maybe some areas that Joel exposed in your shot process or your mentality, your mindset when it comes to shooting. Whether it's a firearm, a bow, it doesn't matter. It starts with the shooter, and I know I found some things that I personally need to work on, things that I never thought of, and I'm really excited and happy to learn alongside you guys on this episode. So thanks for joining me. Really look forward to some. I have a ton of episodes coming up, guys. I am recording right now like a madman. So Thanks for following along, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.